Hi, my name is Gabi, also known as Mrs Pigeon, and in this video I'm redrawing old digital artwork from 10 years ago on my old DeviantArt page. So let's go! So I joined DeviantArt back in 2007 when I was 11, and I quickly became obsessed with the Sonic the Hedgehog art style. I already really liked the games. I had like Sonic Adventure, Sonic Heroes, and yeah, I really enjoyed that sort of anthro art style. I really liked their faces and their colours. And so I came up with my own OC, which was my first ever original character called Crystal the cat, who's actually a tiger. And not long after that, I became obsessed with the anime Sonic X, which actually was the first ever anime I ever watched. When I first attempted this Sonic X style for Crystal, it was actually the first time I ever used a reference for an original character, because I kind of used references whenever I drew already existing characters, but whenever I drew my own, I would be like, well, I came up with it, so I don't need to look at a picture. But because I wanted to get the shading and the proportions right, I did use a reference of Rouge the Bat from Sonic X, which funnily enough, I also used her for the redraw. I mean, obviously, it didn't look great, let's be honest. The shading was definitely not too bad, considering I wasn't used to shading back then. But at this point, I was using paint, which I think most of us start off with using, and there's obvious lack of tools and there are no layers, which makes digital art really hard for me. And I never used to sketch before drawing, I would just go straight into it. I actually redrew this 2 more times. I think I redrew it again in 2009 and maybe again in 2010 or 11. I've actually looked at those 3 Sonic X attempts in another video I did where I did a reaction to my old DeviantArt page, which if you like people cringing at bad work and hating themselves, I think you would enjoy watching, so I'll link that in the description. But yeah, I am happy with this outcome. I do think that Crystal looks like now that she could be in the Sonic X show. I still think there are some bits a bit off, but I could always try and redraw her again in the near future. So alongside really loving Sonic and Sonic X, I also really loved Spongebob. It's one of my favourite cartoons, and it really was one of my favourites back then as well. And Tom Kenny, who voices Spongebob, is one of my favourite voice actors. You know, he also does Spyro, he does the Ice King from Adventure Time, he does Dog from Cat Dog, the purple dude from the Cramp Twins, and a whole load of other characters. I really wanted to redraw him because when I found the image I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good readaptation of him, but it really doesn't look like it's from SpongeBob. You can kind of tell that it's supposed to be him, but no, you know? So when I redrew him this time, I used a reference of SpongeBob so that I can first of all capture his very cartoony run a bit better, but also to really get that Nickelodeon cartoon style, which I think I did pretty well. But I do think he's terrifying as a human. He should stay a sponge. Now, Natalia is my first ever anime OC, and I've got to tell you, between you and me, she is the cringiest OC I've ever come up with. Not only is she very typical in design, like she's a human who's apparently anime, and she's part animal, but her backstory is the worst thing I've ever thought of. Seriously, in that DeviantArt video I talk about it, and I nearly cry of embarrassment. You should definitely check that out. I was terrible at drawing anime back then. You could barely say that was anime. I was awful. I loved anime, but I just couldn't crack it. And even now, anime is pretty hard. You know, I struggle with the sort of anatomy of a female anime character because they're so tall and skinny, but they're also very top heavy, like their boobs are huge and wobbly, and their shoulders are really broad, and I'm not used to that. So you actually see me go back and change the bottom part because I made her a bit too bottom heavy. So I changed the shape of her legs and bum, and I also changed her shoes because I didn't like how they turned out. I also changed from the original drawing the pose pretty much completely. She was supposed to look very natural, like she's smiling for the camera, but I don't even know. But the biggest change I wanted to make was the actual hand gestures. For some reason, even though like the focal point of her was that she was part animal, I made her human hand the more dominant hand in the old drawing and left the paw very, I don't even know. And so when I redrew her, I made sure that her pawed hand was the sort of more of the subject of the pose, and the other hand was just chilling on her hip. I also kept her very typical kawaii pose. You know, back then it was the wink with the peace sign, but that was supposed to be a peace sign. And so with the redraw, because I changed what the hands were doing, it's kind of like a grr, kawaii grr pose. And I definitely think there's an improvement here, although I still don't think the anatomy is perfect. I do like the pose, and it's definitely a pose I'm not used to drawing, so I came out of my comfort zone there. And I definitely think the animal parts were a big improvement, and also the shading, because back then the shading was so thick that she kind of looked like a button. And finally I drew my lovely cat Phoebe, which was actually the hardest out of the 4 to redraw because I am so out of practice with drawing animals. In fact, back then I barely drew animals unless they were in the sort of Sonic style. And so I'm really not used to it, and I'm definitely not used to it now. And there's actually quite a significant difference between the actual design of Phoebe, because when I first drew her in 2008, she was 2. And she was fluffier, she was skinnier, she was smaller, and she was just younger looking. And you know, now she's 12 and her fur's a bit thinner and she's fatter and she's definitely dopier in like with her age. She's got very dopey eyes in this drawing, and she's smiling because I was trying to give her a slight sassy smirk, because as she's gotten older she's gotten fiercer as well. I also made her browner in the up-to-date one because as she's gotten older her black fur did turn brown. And in the summer her fur goes like ginger. It's beautiful. And I also think that she was supposed to have some black splodges on her paws, but all the reference images I used are of her sitting in things like boxes and baskets, because she just likes to sit in weird places, which is actually why I drew her sitting in the redraw. Even though it's my least favourite, I'd still like how it came out. I do think the anatomy of her, despite me not being very good at animal anatomy, was definitely better. But if I was to redraw her again, I would probably give her bigger paws, because Phoebe actually has really huge paws. They're like hands. So this is it for my Draw This Again video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can give the video a like. If you'd like to show it to your buddies, and go ahead. If you'd like to see the rest, you can subscribe to the Pigeon's Nest. And let me know what other art videos you'd like me to see in the comments below. And also, which was your favourite redraw? Let me know as well. Bye!